Hello, and welcome to Not Just Trains, where we talk about all things public transportation, and in this episode, how it can reduce the effects of climate change. However, before we continue, today's episode is sponsored by Life Invader, the only social media app selling your data since 2010. I often hear people say
That in order to fix traffic, all we need to do was just add one more lane.
this never seems to actually materialize when another lane is added, though. This is because when you add another lane, it encourages more people to utilize that lane as well, which is known as induced demand. Not only that, but if another lane is created, it generally means that other forms of transit were removed and made way for another lane. Suffice it to say, the problem has nothing to do with how many lanes there are, but everything to do with the way people get around. In the United States, almost everywhere, except for New York and the parts of Alaska where the population is 2, people primarily use cars to get around. And this has huge unintended consequences. For one, there are a lot of externalities to owning and operating a car. Second, car-centric cities are an inefficient way to get around. And the third point, which is that it has huge effects on our climate, which is what the rest of this video will be focused on. Cars emit greenhouse gases. Well, obviously they do, and other pollutants that contribute to climate change. This has a huge impact on the climate, specifically in the United States, because according to an article by the Union of Concerned Scientists titled Car Emissions and Global Warming, it says, quote, our vehicles are a major cause of global warming. Collectively, cars and trucks account for nearly one-fifth of all U.S. emissions, emitting around 24 pounds of carbon dioxide and other global warming gases for every gallon of gas. About 5 pounds comes from extraction, production, and delivery of the fuel, while the great bulk of heat trapping emissions, more than 19 pounds per gallon, comes right out of a car's tailpipe. In total, the U.S. transportation sector, which includes cars, trucks, planes, trains, ships, and freight, produce nearly 30% of all U.S. global warming emissions, more than almost any other sector. End quote. So, what is the alternative then? Public transportation still pollutes the environment, and does this mean electric cars are the alternative? Well, electric cars are better. They still produce a lot of pollution, especially during production, relative to the amount of pollution by trains. This is this is because the more you scale up something, it generally means that said thing will be more efficient. So let's take transportation. A typical commuter rail trail can carry up to several hundred passengers on a full train, and the production of this train produces about zero point 0.2 pounds of greenhouse gases per person. Compare that to the production of electric cars, which is between 2.5 and 16 metric tons of CO2, according to Climate Portal MIT. This is not to mention that most of the time the electric cars gets its electricity from non-renewable sources that emit greenhouse gases, which makes it so that there is practically no difference between that and a gas-powered car. So now we know public transportation is a much better alternative to cars, from an environmental standpoint as well. How would we go about even implementing this level of public transportation? Well, with a lot of things, it has to do with politics. And in this case, putting pressure on those who can make and carry out the decisions that affect everyone. The most common way of putting pressure on institutions is by flexing your bargaining power. In the case of the Netherlands, the country was facing a growth of car-centric infrastructure, much like the United States, because of post-war economic boom that made residents more capable of purchasing cars. But the difference is in how they responded. Even though this was a movement geared towards improving bike infrastructure and not public transportation, it was still one example of getting to a greener future through other transit options. The Stop the Child Murder, sorry, the Stop the Child Murder movement, as it's known in English, was a campaign that brought attention to child deaths caused by cars. This resulted in mass demonstrations by cyclists and citizens who staged die-ins and protests. Furthermore, many local cycling groups and other organizations lobbied municipalities to improve cycling infrastructure and to created an economic incentive for politicians to pass legislation to create more cycling infrastructure. And as a result, you have fewer cars on the streets and much more bikes in the Netherlands today. Well, that's it, folks. That's the video. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you like and comment or something. Yeah.